All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television show in the history of the universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown. All three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today is the day I'm going to be counting down the top 10 books I read in the year 2022. Now, maybe you saw my very popular video of the top 10 books I read in the year 2021, or maybe you've seen any number of my different types of book rankings, like my top 10 fantasy books, my top 10 science fiction books, my top 10 mystery books, my top 10, thriller novels, or, I've done all sorts of rankings. I have a very difficult time of keeping these lists to 10 books. Usually I do a top 10 list and I starting at book number 17. And so I end up, because there's a lot of books that I just can't leave off these lists. I can never narrow it down to 10. But for these top 10 lists at the end of the year, my top 10 yearly favorite books, I've tried to keep it to 10. However, again, if you watched the one I did last year, I did keep it to 10, but I had 2 honorable mentions. This year I've kept it to 10. I have 3 honorable mentions. I'm not getting better at this. I'm like, it's getting worse. And then I'm sure in 2023 I'll have 4 honorable mentions, and then 5 honorable, and then 10 years from now I'll have like 70 honorable mentions. I don't know. I have no self-control. So let's talk about this. So some of these books that you're going to see on this list, you won't be surprised by some of the books you see on the list, because I've talked about a lot of some of these books are books that have been my favorite books for a long time, for my whole life, and I just happened to do a reread this year. So you will see some books that are rereads. There's a few books on this list that I've probably read 10 times in my life, and I read it again this year, but it made my top 10. There's some books that I've never read before, and they're first time reads. And so be prepared for that. And then, well, those are the only 2 types of books. Yeah, I don't think there's any other type. The ones I've already read, the ones I've never read. I don't think there's an in-between. Anyway, those are the types of books you can see on here. So let's get to it. Let's start with my 3 honorable mentions, and we will discuss these books briefly. I won't get too in-depth into any one book. If you want to see every single book that I'm going to pull out in this list, you will. I did a much bigger and in-depth review of these books on my channel, and the way to find those reviews is simple. Just type my last name into your YouTube search bar and the title of the book, and into the same YouTube search bar at the same time, and click find or go or whatever it is, or enter or whatever, and the book review will magically appear upon your computer screen or your phone or whatever the hell you're using. So let's get to the top. These are my 3 honorable mentions, okay? And we're going to start this out in high fashion. So honorable mention number 1, so this I guess would be number 13 on the list, God's Grave by J. Kristoff, book number 2 in his Nevernight trilogy. Oh my Lord, these books are fantastic. I love everything about this series, from the style of writing that J. Kristoff is offering to us. And the style of writing is just like he's like throwing every ounce of energy into his prose that he can, and he's, with every word, it's like he's swinging for a home run and hitting a grand slam with that word, with that sentence, with that character's dialogue. Just absolutely exquisitely written. And there's a lot of books that you can tell the writer is trying to show off with his writing, and I know that J. Kristoff is trying to show off with his writing here, but I love it. I love it. The dude needs to keep doing that and being unapologetic about it. Sometimes, writers want the story just to be about the story and the writing to be unnoticeable. That's not what you're getting here. It's a great story, a great fantasy tale, assassins, thieves, quests, dark, dangerous, knives thrown, just people getting stabbed in the face. And I mean, it's bloody, it's gory, it's witty, it's fun. God's Grave, number 13, one of my honorable mentions. We'll set it over here. By the way, this was the second time I read this. So this is a reread. Now, number 12, one of my other honorable mentions. Now this is not a reread. This one I just discovered this year. And it's another fantasy novel, and it's The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. Everything I said about God's Grave apply to this book. Plus, this book is like a murder mystery set in one of the coolest fantasy settings you're ever going to see. It was just absolutely dope. I loved everything about it. The characters were great. The adventure that they went on was great. The mysteries they were trying to solve were dark and dangerous and brooding and gothic. I loved everything about The Justice for Kings, one of my favorite new fantasy series going, and so that's a new one. Okay, now we're at number 11, my third honorable mention, and this is one that I've read a couple times, and it is David McCullough's John Adams biography. This is an adventure novel in and of itself, every bit as worthy of these other two. Who knew that reading about the life of John Adams, one of our presidents, I think is the second president. Well, I know because I read the book. Is the second president of the United States after George Washington. Just absolutely wonderful biography. And just the life and times of colonial America. You can just learn so much about the history of a lot of things by reading this book. And the HBO miniseries was dope as hell. Now for the top 10. We're breaking another rule, but you'll notice if you watched my top 10 novels or books of 2021, I did the same thing. Now, with the CJ Box books, they were on my top 10. The Joe Pickett series by CJ Box, they were in my top 10 last year, but I couldn't just pick one because they were all awesome, so I held up the whole series as my top one of my... This is another one where I'm going to hold up the whole series, and that is Mark Cameron's Alaskan Mystery Series, starting with Open Carry. So far, there's 4 of them out: Open Carry, Cold Snap, Bone Rattle, and Stone Cross. This is about a police agency in Alaska and all the adventures they have in Alaska. Now, Mark Cameron is a great mystery writer. This is one of my favorite new mystery series. I was just going to hold up Open Carry, but then I'm like, well, God, they were all so damn good. And I'm so pleased with all of them. And Mark Cameron is a friend of mine. Mark Cameron also wrote some of the Tom Clancy. Mark Cameron wrote some of the Tom Clancy books. You can see right there his name at the bottom. He writes in the Jack Ryan universe. But I've also done a podcast with Mark Cameron where we talk about writing and getting published and things like that. And he's a good friend of mine, and he signed my books. I always show off my signed books. So if you want to get into this Alaskan Mystery Series, it's just dynamite. We'll set those over there. That's number 10. Number 9 is from 2 friends of mine. These guys are friends of mine, but that doesn't, I'm not like, just because they're friends of mine doesn't mean that their books aren't super dope. I wouldn't put these books in my top 10 if I didn't think that they were just absolutely dynamite. And one of the best science fiction reads I read this year was Servants of War by my friends Larry Correia and Steve Diamond. And they signed the books too. I always show that off. So number 9 is Servants of War. Now this book is science fiction fantasy. It's kind of set in like this weird alternate universe World War I setting where people are in trench warfare and they're fighting in like big suits of battle armor, and it's just bloody good fun. I was riveted from this. It's just got a great story all the way through, great action, and 2 really cool dudes that have written one of the coolest books. And I hope they do us some more. I hope they do more in this universe because it's just great. So Servants of War, Larry Correia, and Steve Diamond is number 9. Number 8. Oh, one of the best mysteries I've read in a long time, and that's Richard Montanari's The Rosary Girls. I don't know if you can see that. Sometimes my little flashy book cover plastic stuff makes it glare. Anyway, The Rosary Girls, set in Philadelphia, with two of the coolest investigators you're ever going to find. I liken this to Dennis Lehane's Kenzie and Gennaro series, but this one stars Kevin Bryan and Jessica Balzano. So Kevin Bryan and the Jessica Balzano series. There's 10 books in the series. I read this and immediately went and bought the other 9 books in hardcover because it was just so fantastic. One of the great mystery series I've ever read. I think of the 10, I think I've read 3, but this one is just magnificent. Everything you want in a bloody good, fun, dark serial killer novel. Number, let's see, 10, 8, 9. So this would be 7. 4, 3, yeah, 7. Book 7. A Tom Clancy novel, Without Remorse. The John Clark story. Without Remorse, it's set in the Jack Ryan universe, but it stars John Clark, one of the most badass assassins in all of thrillerdom, in all the thriller books. So I don't know if I need to explain this. This is just kind of like, I've reread this one a few times. So this is a reread. One of my favorite thriller novels. If not, I bet this would be it's just one of my favorite thriller novels of all time. Tom Clancy. You can't get better than Tom Clancy when it comes to thrillers. Tom Clancy is my favorite thriller writer. And the Jack Ryan universe is my favorite thriller universe. And John Clark is a badass. Now, number 6, I believe I'm to. Yes, 6. And this is a book I discovered on a whim, just pulled it out of the bookstore and read it, and it became one of my favorites of the year, and that is Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. A great coming-of-age tale set in Minnesota, and it's just absolutely wonderful. Reminded me so much of Boy's Life by Robert McCammon, and it's just gorgeously written, effortlessly written. Just such a great tale set in 1961. It's all about all of those things that from the 60s that made growing up in the 60s as a youth great. I never grew up then. I grew up in the 80s. But, most of the Stephen King, like It, a lot of the Stephen King books talk about growing up in the 60s and stuff. Anyway, Ordinary Grace. Now let's do the top 5. So we're to the top 5. And this is another book I just stumbled upon in the bookstore this year and then read it for the first time. Never heard of this author before, and it became one of my favorite mystery novels I've ever read. And that is J. Todd Scott's The Far Empty. And that is just a cool cover. I like everything about the cover. I like everything about this book. This is about a small Texas town, and just got some of the most evil characters I've ever read, and some of the most noble characters I've ever read. And it's about the Mexican drug cartels and how they just fuck with these small towns along the border and make people's lives miserable, and the cops and the people that have to investigate this stuff. And it's just insanity. One of the greatest mysteries I've read. I just loved everything about this. Probably one of my favorite book reviews I did this year was for this book. And if you want to know, if you've ever read Don Winslow's Power of the Dog cartel trilogy, this is right up there with it. And I know that the Power of the Dog cartel trilogy was in my top 10 last year. Stephen King comes in at number 4 with 11/22/63. One of my top 5 favorite Stephen King novels. I reread this. I'm reading and reviewing on the channel all the Stephen King novels in order of publication. This one came up earlier this year. It's one of my favorite Stephen King novels. Oh my God. It's just a perfect novel. I don't want to say too much about it other than it's a time travel novel about the JFK assassination. You can go watch my review of it by typing in Durfee 11/22/63. The review will come up, and that's where I gush on and on about just how perfect this novel is. Everything about it is so heartfelt, so well researched, so gripping and well paced. One of the best Stephen King novels ever. And then at number 3, we've got one of my favorite novels of all time, Alaska. I reread this James Michener book this year, and I absolutely adored it. Again, it's one of the ones I reread quite often, and it just means so much to me because I grew up in Alaska. If you want to know everything about Alaska, from the way it was formed geographically and I don't know, the way the continents were formed and the way the Alaska was formed and how the creatures sprung about on Alaska, from the woolly mammoth to everything, and then to the native Alaskans, and then the gold rush and all of that. Alaska is a gripping adventure novel about all of that stuff. Number 2, second favorite novel I read this year, and I'm going to take a drink because by the way, it's diet caffeine-free Pepsi. If you thought I was drinking beer, I'm not an alcohol person, but I will drink really bad soda. Storm of Swords by George R. Martin. One of my probably top 5 books of all time. I reread this one this year for the channel and left a review of it. Storm of Swords. Oh my gosh, just great. In fact, my review of Storm of Swords, that if you can want to watch it, I did my review from Germany in front of a German castle for this book. It's just, I planned my reading around my trip to Germany so I could review this book in front of the castle. Storm of Swords, Game of Thrones. I don't think I need to tell. I've probably read this book 8 times. I don't think I need to tell anybody any more about it other than it's one of the greatest fantasy novels ever written. It's just awesome. The favorite book that I read this year, and this is the first time I read it, was this year, and that is book number 3 in Tad Williams' The Last King of Osten-Ard series, and that is Into the Narrow Dark. I think this is the greatest fantasy novel that's come out in the last 25 years. It just blew me away. Of course, you know that Tad Williams is one of my mainest men. I mean, I got all of the Tad Williams book here. He's probably one of my favorite writers. He's signed all my books. Not only did he sign all my books, but he did the cover for my novels. He did the cover blurb, I don't know if you can see that. But Tad Williams gave me the little blurb there. Anyway, enough of that. The book is just absolutely great, and it is book number 3 in his Last King of Osten-Ard series, and we've got the Witchwood Crown over here, and we've got the Empire of Grass. Those are the first 2 books, and then we've got Into the Narrow Dark. It continues the story that we left off in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, of course, was the Dragonbone Chair. I've got those over here too, Dragonbone Chair. Anyway, one of my, probably after Lord of the Rings, this is my favorite fantasy series and favorite fantasy writer. These Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn books and these Osten-Ard books by Tad Williams, just absolutely great. And this book was everything I love about fantasy. It had action, adventure, the writing was great, the prose was poetic, and the characters were absolutely magnificent. And this story blew my mind. Everything Tad Williams does is genius level writing, and this is a culmination. I can't wait for book 4 to come out to see how this series ends. And I know if it comes out next year, it's probably going to be my number 1 read of next year too. I just love this series, and this book was so cool. Anyway, that, my friends, is my top 10 books that I read in the year 2022. And I hope you enjoyed that.